Hey bestie, it's time for your next session of Real Talk Friend Therapy with your favorite big sister auntie queen, Daysha Veronica. What up, y'all? Happy Women's History Month and International Women's Day, okay? Normally, this month and what it stands for brings me a lot of pride. But I gotta tell y'all, I'm a little lost in the sauce about female solidarity in 2025. As a Black woman, I'm still really, really disappointed by the outcome of this past election and what the exit poll statistics have revealed, not only about BIPOC solidarity, but female solidarity as well. Which brings us to today's episode topic. What does it mean to be a girl's girl in 2025? What are we trying to communicate when we say another woman is a girl's girl? Because in one world, you could say it's a cute little catchphrase that's meant to say that this woman supports women. But again, I have to ask, what does it mean to support women in 2025? What does it mean to show up for women and to do so in a truly intersectional way in 2025? Because this past election, y'all, it was not it. It was not it. Y'all know I love astrology. And Venus, which is the planet of love and art and beauty and feminine energy, just went retrograde on March 1st. And if you're new to astrology, a retrograde is when a planet enters its resting phase. So it's getting some beauty sleep for a little bit. There's actually a really beautiful myth associated with Venus retrograde that Chani tells it so beautifully. Chani is a very prominent astrologer, and she talks about this myth of Inanna and Ereshkigal. And if I tried to retell it for you, I can't tell it in the same way. Chani says it with such beauty. And again, as I've mentioned, her voice is like milk and honey. So I would highly recommend going to her to hear the story. But all of this is to say that Venus is getting its beauty sleep for a little bit. And it is believed that when a planet is at rest, all of the elements that it governs fall out of whack. So fun fact, it's actually heavily advised not to do anything crazy in terms of adjusting your look, because again, Venus governs beauty. So it's advised not to do something like get a haircut or try laser hair removal for the first time during a Venus retrograde, because it either might not go well or you might have doubts about the outcome of the procedure. But what I find so fascinating is that not only is Venus retrograde, but it is retrograde in Aries, which is a very fiery and bombastic sign. If you know an Aries, Becky is an Aries. But what is truly fascinating is that this is the same place that it retrograded 8 years ago in 2017. Do you know what was happening 8 years ago? Not only was Trump starting his first term as president, but the Me Too movement catalyzed and galvanized women to share their stories and rise up against a pervasive culture of sexual assault. There were the women's marches and the exposing of abusive power structures in various industries like music, Hollywood, and tech. Again, Chani, who's one of my favorite astrologers to follow, says that as Venus is going through this same retrograde path again, it's not that we will be experiencing the same thing. So it's not going to be like a copycat of 2017. But she says to view 2017 and 2025 as rhyming years, as years that are in conversation with one another across time and space. So I think that 2025 is asking of us to think deeply about what went right and what went wrong back then, and to continue evolving and asking questions about what female solidarity looks like. And I'm really excited to dig into that topic today with our favorite recurring voice on the podcast and my bestie, Becky Harris. Becky and I are constantly talking about and dissecting what it means to be a feminist and gender equality and how it intersects with politics, just in our everyday lives. Like, y'all would get whiplash looking at our text threads and how we'll go from talking about women's reproductive rights and then things you'd only know if you ever lived in Boston memes. Our transitions are wild, basically non-existent. But I knew that would make her a perfect guest for today's episode because one of the things that I love about talking with her, and you might have already noticed this from other conversations I've had with her on the podcast, but I just love how she's willing to investigate topics with me. It's not about one of us being right or wrong. It really is just about sharing ideas and thoughts and feelings and experiences and trying to make meaning from them. And I just think that when it comes to talking about complex or tense topics with our friends, it is so important to be able to keep communication open and be curious about where people are coming from. And it's something that I feel like we've always been able to do very intrinsically. So I hope that that will be a great model for people who maybe struggle with that in their friendships. All right, y'all, here it is, my conversation on what it means to be a girl's girl in 2025 with the lovely Becky Harris. Hi, Beck. Welcome back. Long
hey,
time
Day.
You guys, Becky is coming to us as an employed woman.
Oh, I'm employed. Oh, I'm finally employed.
She's actually at the office at this moment, and
Crazy.
I could not be happier. But I did call her this week, or no, she called me. It's like she knew that I was crashing out because I was just like, you guys, I am on the.
Well, because I felt it too, Day. I felt it too.
I know.
I was like, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be at Daysha's.
I was so heartbroken that like she had to go to her first day at work. She would usually spend up here with me because we watch Married at First Sight, and she couldn't. And so I just had to send her voice notes. It was so painful.
I'm not gonna lie. Like they gave me the contract, right, of everything. I didn't look at the health insurance options. I didn't look at the 401k. The first thing I saw that I was like, oh, that's tough, is they were like, yeah, we come in on Tuesdays. And I was like, oh, Tuesdays is Married at First Sight night. Like that was my immediate I'm an adult woman. Anyways.
Oh my God. But you guys, if you have not been, this season of Married at First Sight, especially right now, it is
off.
Spicy.
Ooh. Yeah. Ooh.
So I get it. So this is going to be airing in Women's History Month. And so I thought it would be really great to have a conversation about this phrase that I feel like is constantly popping up on the internet, which is being a girl's girl.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of the landscape that we are in, especially with Trump getting reelected and being helped by a white female majority,
mm-hmm.
I have to say that I am personally so lost on what it means to be a girl's girl in 2025. And, it was interesting. Right before we started recording, I know that you were talking about how pre-Trump, but like when you were growing up, no one was a girl's girl. Like girls hated each other.
Girls were brutal, Day. Yeah.
And so I'm curious to hear from you both from a pre-Trump understanding and now a post-second-term Trump understanding. What do people mean when they say that? What does it mean to be a girl's girl?
I'll give you what I've interpreted it to mean, and then maybe you could tell me perhaps where I'm getting it wrong, or perhaps where the more of the focus is in terms of your definition and how it ties into the Trump presidency.
Totally.
Yeah. So for me,
I don't think you're getting it wrong.
But I wonder if maybe we have different connotations with it. So maybe. I guess for me, I have thought of the girl's girl phrase and concept highlights something, an attitude in a woman where they try to be female positive and like female focused. And in some ways, not a direct comparison, but in some ways, it kind of reminds me of the analogy with anti-racism, because the concept is that the prevailing leading demographic or the strongest majority of where we are as a society and like the current of where we are is something that's so strong that in order to just be neutral, you actually can't be neutral. You have to be pushing against it. So for example, you can't just say I'm not racist because racism is so entrenched. You have to be anti-racist. And in the same way that I feel like girls almost can't just be neutral to girls and guys, society is still unfortunately in many ways still steering us so much towards this undercurrent of animosity towards women and things that are women focused, that if you're just neutral, you end up not being neutral and you end up kind of growing with these little bits of resentment or distaste towards women, or once again, women-centered things. So sometimes being a girl's...
there was a quote, it was like, if you're neutral in the face of like oppression, you've basically like chosen the side of the oppressor.
Right, because it reminds me of, when you're in a riptide or when you're in a current, not swimming. If you swim against the current, sometimes you just stay in the same spot. So staying in the same spot in a strong current actually means a lot of times having to push in the opposite direction. Whereas doing nothing in a current, you actually aren't doing nothing, you're moving. So I kind of look at it as that. I mean, I think, like, for example, I have always loved women. I'm heterosexually, I'm straight, but in terms of just feeling a connection to women, I've always loved women. And I've always loved guys. I've always had really good guy friends, and it was always very important for me, and I don't know why.
You're a relationships person. Like, relationships in a platonic way mean a lot to you.
They do. They are like the foundation of my life. And like, no one told me that. No one asked me to be like that. I am just I need to come up with a better word than tribe, because I know that's not the best term right now to be using. But in terms of just like that communal thing is epically important to me. There are a lot of genres. Like, I feel like there's genres of movies that fall into these different categories of kind of what life is about. It's like finding joy. It's finding your purpose. It's finding your true love. And some are, it's finding your community and family. I think that's probably why I love Fast and the Furious movies so much, because I just love how often he talks about family.
I did not know that about you. I did not realize you loved that franchise.
I love that franchise so much. But for such a small reason for what's actually part of that, like, skip all the fast. I mean, I do love the fast car stuff. I just get really excited by it, and I love the soundtrack. But the through line of what I love so much about it is that it is about a group of friends who treat themselves like family and who never lose a sense of that being like the foundation of their lives, even as they get older, and they maintain being like cool, fit, and dedicated to each other while having these really chaotic lives and relationships and children and like living big. None of that means they don't also hold a foundation of friends being family. And it's weird to say, but like, that's actually a really hard thing to find. There are generally people who are like, we want to be ambitious, we want adventure, we want this. And then there are people who are, I don't really leave my hometown. It's all about my community. You stay focused, live small, think small, tight knit, whatever. It's hard to see examples of those things crossing and being together. And so it's weird to say, but the Fast and the Furious kind of delivers on that for me. So I don't know. Anyways, I also like love Vin Diesel and Paul Walker, and it's just and like, I actually do like car chase scenes. So anyways,
I'm learning so much today. It's kind of like
I almost lost my license in high school for speeding.
Oh.
And then because that happened, I was like, you need to rein this in. Then I haven't had an issue with that in honestly like 10, 13 years. But yeah, when I first got my license, those movies had just come out, and it affected me too much. Anyways, point being, also, wait, a sidebar. Also, Vin Diesel always makes sure that in his movies, they end up having some barbecue with the LA skyline in the background. And I just feel like that just shows on a certain level that he gets me. But we can get back to the point of it. So
this is like when I found out that you love Zelda, and I was like,
yes,
what?
Love that. But yeah, so for me, I grew up with older women around me that were very bitter towards men. And I was very fortunate to grow up in becoming friends with a couple guys who were just so wonderful. So I very much had this thing of like my friend group was girls and guys, and even surprising to the fact that I had a lot of family members who were against it. But what's interesting is that these women were also, without realizing it, they would say they were pro women, but they actually weren't. They were like a lot of moms growing up for me, where the minute another mom walked by and then was out of like earshot, the mom I was with would say some catty, rude comment. I mean, boys talk shit about girls, moms and parents talk shit about girls, and girls talked shit about girls. I sometimes something is so pervasive that you don't even realize it. Like, I don't think as a young kid, I was fully aware of the fact that I lived in an environment where there was just a lot of animosity towards women because it's all I knew. But I did know that it was really important for me to have a foundation of people growing up that I felt safe with. And I did know from a very early age that most girls, other than like my two best female friends, I didn't feel safe with. Like, most girls didn't feel like what we would use now as a girl's girl. Okay. I just didn't feel safe with them. So all throughout middle school and high school and college, I had like one or two super close female friends, and the rest of all of my friends were boys. So much so that when I started at BuzzFeed, I actually made an identity video about being a girl that has lots of guy friends. And I think that is when, and there was already something that always kind of didn't fully sit with me with that. Like, I didn't inherently like to brag about that. I wasn't proud of that. It just was what it was. But then when I made this video early on at BuzzFeed about a lot of my friends being guy friends, I got all these messages in this video, and it was just this barrage of girls commenting, being like, yeah, this is me too. Fucking hate girls. I can't. And the amount of girls connecting with my video and just shitting on other girls made me be like, oh no, this was a circumstantial thing because I wished I'd had more female friends. I just didn't connect a lot with them. I was very rambunctious, and I was weird and quirky, and I didn't fit in with a lot of the girls. I fit in with a lot of the guys, but I would have loved to have more female friends. And the female friends that I did have were epically more important and closer to me. And I remember that distinct thing of being like, I think that was probably right before the phrase girl's girl kind of came into our vernacular. Yeah, there was so much hatred. It was so much of like, yeah, fuck girls. This is why I only am friends with guys. And so I think that was evidence of the ending, or just that was evidence that we were still in that time period where it was just so socially acceptable to not like girls. And I think the girls girl movement is a reaction to that. And I think there may be shades of it, right? Like, I'm sure a more extreme version of girls girl is perhaps where you're overly girly. Maybe you don't fuck with guys at all. Maybe you're hyper feminine. I'm sure, right, that there's a far version of it. But to me, it just means that you actively work to check on your internal prejudices and you try to support women. Because, and I think we talked about this before, Day, if I'm not careful, when I watch a video on social media, any platform, if it's a guy, I do not immediately break down how he looks. But if it's a woman, I immediately think about how she looks. Like, if someone passes by, if it's a singer, if it's in a movie, like I have worked for years to try, and even with comedy, I am such a, like, I've done comedy myself. I've written comedy. I know how hard it is for women who do comedy to be respected. And even me, I am harder on female comedians. So to me, girls girl is understanding that we're already kind of programmed for that, and then wanting to make sure that I don't let that programming, I try to work on it. And so it's wanting to be mindful of trying to be supportive of women, to push back, I think, at something that's already pretty prevalent and sad still, even though I think we are getting better at it. So now, ending that whole thing of my interpretation, can you tell me how you think that has, because you phrased this episode's question in this pre-Trump, post-Trump thing. Yeah. How does the girls girl thing that I'm thinking of connect with Trump?
Yeah. So I think for me, as a Black woman, like, I think about this idea of being a girl's girl from a very intersectional place.
Right.
And in theory, everything that you're saying about it, I want to believe and I champion and I love supporting women. It's why I built Yes Queen. It's why I do this podcast. But I do think that there are ways in which this idea of being a girl's girl,
white bitches co-opt it.
Yeah, it's weaponized. And it's often used to the benefit to promote white feminism.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And so I bring up the pre-Trump and post-Trump because, you know, you want to say like, oh, let's be a girl's girl. And I'm like, it is hard for me to imagine, like, this man has flat out said that he is ready to have a war on women's reproductive rights. And over 50% of white women said, I'm good with that.
Yep. Yeah.
And so for me, I'm just like, all right, let's really think about what this means to be a girl's girl. Because for me, I'm not over it. I don't know if I'll ever be over it. The fact that...
totally. When we were scouting for podcast talent, I did a deep dive into looking for therapists. And when I mentioned this to you off camera before, what I thought was so interesting was that when it's white female therapists, I do have to make sure that they specialize in some type of friendship component, because there was tons of white female therapist TikToks where you could go down as far as possible and you never saw a post about female friendships. What ended up being really significant and very different with Black female therapists was that they could have nothing on their profile about specializing in friendship or uplifting other women, but it was just so inherently grained in their formation that like every single Black female therapist that I found on TikTok, you go within a couple rows down on their posts and it was something about, you know, the unity of them with Black women. And so I was like, yeah, that's really interesting. Like, it feels like this, when I talk about like a sisterhood in a true sense, where you come out to show up for it, it's still kind of, it's maybe talked about with women, but when you actually look at its like application, it's still kind of a radical idea with white girls. Like we talk a good game, but I don't see you actually, where's the real value? Like, where are you really enacting this sense of like sisterhood? And then when you see it with Black women, it's in the fabric of everything they do. And it's every other post. So I think that's a little of an aside, but it is evidence that Black women, there's so much more of a sisterhood, that there's so much more of this thing, and I think it's genuine, whereas I can see the girl's girl shtick being more of a weaponized phrase.
Yeah, it feels like a tool. It feels like again, and it's something that I love. Like, you want to say, like, let's work on being a girl's girl. Like, let's fight the patriarchy. Because the patriarchy is honestly what impacts all of us, right? But I'm like, when it comes down to it, though, when it really comes down to like making those sacrifices that will put white women against the patriarchy, more often than not all though, not all, but like, again, over 50% choose the patriarchy.
And I think this is going to sound, okay, so I got so mad at my mom when she once said this. And then I recently brought this back up to her and I was like, I'm not mad at it anymore. When I was younger, I thought my mom was insulting Black women when she said this thing. And I learned later that she wasn't. She was just being real. My mom told me years ago that Black women will get more done in society and we owe more to Black women than we do to white women in the terms of like female feminism progression. Because she was like, there will always be a cop-out for white women because up until very recently, they were the marital option for white men. So white women trying to push the betterment of women always then had the option to, like, she didn't say the phrase sellout, I forget what she said, but they always had the option to kind of stop with the movement and then just go into more of a self-serving route where if they just kind of shut up and appeased a male partner, their life would be really easy. And so they could always be just, well, I could just go do that. Whereas no one was giving Black women, like the idea of a Black woman getting a free pass to just be like comforted and taken care of by no Black woman was giving that ticket. So these women were like, if something's going to work for me, I'm going to have to fucking do it myself. And so she was trying to talk to me about that when I was like 11. And for some reason,
Sue was like, you're going to learn today.
Yeah, and I remember because I was in Miss Abadili's class and she was driving me to my school and there was some woman in our town running for mayor and she was Black or something like that. But and my mom was like, she's not going to win. She has ideas that people think are radical, but they're actually the ideas that we really need. People are saying really nasty things about her. If you hear anything about her, you should stick up for her. And then it turned into this tangent about Black women pushing movements forward and why white women just cop out and just just end up shutting up and giving up and selling out to be like trophy wives. And I don't know why there was a subtlety or there was a nuance in her argument. I think I got too caught up on the fact that I was like, well, Black women could be desirable and men would want them to be trophy wives. Like, I don't know. I got stuck on something, and I ended up being like, Mom, that's so mean against Black women. And she's like, no, it's not. You're missing the point. What I'm saying is that no one's ever showed up to save them. Like, they have to do it themselves because of institutionalized racism. I'm not saying that they're not worthy of male partners. I'm just saying life has been harder for them. And I don't know. I was 11. I just didn't, but I recently remembered that conversation, and her and I talked about it. And then of course she's like, well, I was always right. You always gave me a hard time. And I was just like, all right.
Okay. Oh, Sue.
I'm trying to extend an olive branch to you, but fuck, fine.
You can't ever extend an olive branch to your mother. Like,
no,
it's just mothers in general.
Like, no, I know, right. She's like, you always gave me a hard. I was like, I don't even think you remember the conversation. I think you're just like, oh, right, fine. But I think there's truth to that, right? Black women they have to put their money and their action where their mouth is, whereas white women can be really performative about it. But then, do you actually show up when the time comes to stand behind that concept? And yeah, I hear you. I feel like the answer is no.
Yeah. And then I also think one of the things that I struggle with it too is that I also feel like some people use it in a manipulative way where what they're saying is that women can't be in competition.
Yes. Mm-hmm. You can't criticize women.
Yes. You can't criticize. We can't be in competition. We can't question. It's either like we're all on the side of, this idea of like within the Me Too movement, like you believe all women or you believe no women,
right?
And that there's no middle ground either.
Right.
And so I think that's where I struggle with this idea of being a girl's girl, because in theory, again, I love it. I stand by, like when you talk about it, I'm like, yes, that is what I am for.
Right.
But I think that in the bigger zeitgeist, it is often very much a tool that is manipulated to uphold white feminism, and then also to say that it's like this,
and avoid criticism.
Yeah, this impractical tool of, of accountability. Like it's honestly, It's allowing people to not take accountability.
Yep. I mean, because I've seen it used in social media. I've seen it where, for example, if some dude's rich, problematic wife does some bullshit and you call it out, you'll get silenced because you're not a girl's girl.
Yeah.
And it's like, she doesn't speak for me. She's not on my team. I don't have any allegiance to her. Girl's girl is not a code for everything, but it will work in a way where we're all supposed to just kind of shut up. And if anything, it almost gets weaponized in a patriarchal sense. Like, yeah. I imagine some boardroom somewhere full of men where they're like, they don't like our ad. They're criticizing our ad. What should we do? And I imagine some stupid bro being like, well, let's just come back at them and say they're not being girls. Like, you can imagine that. But I can also picture it in a racist sense too. There's this idea that if Black women want to critique horrible or shady actions of white women, then all of a sudden we hear all of this girl's girl bullshit.
Yeah.
But like you said, then where is that support when it comes to voting for things to help disadvantaged women?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then, do you think that we should be striving towards being girls in our current world? Is that helpful or productive now, thinking about that nuance that we've discovered in what people use the term being a girl's girl for?
Yeah, you see, I don't know. I think maybe you bring up such good points about how it can be so easily weaponized that, the current, pushing against the current example, that works because it's really simplistic, right? But the shades of the actual application of this girl's girl movement are far more nuanced. And I think those types of really nice and clean analogies only work, I think, once you understand at first the true complexity of what we're talking about. And then you can kind of zoom out and give this overhead analogy or metaphor to kind of wrap it up and make it clean. But if we do that too quickly, we miss the opportunity to really make sure that women and young girls are understanding at first what the root of it is, which is this very complex patriarchal system, and why we say this phrase and what we actually mean and what we're actually trying to fight against and what we're actually should not be included in it, and all of this. So I think you're right. I think it was a shorthand that maybe was good at getting the initial movement going, but now it probably overrides too many important conversations. And so perhaps the more beneficial thing to do now is be more specific in identifying, here are the ways in which your internalized biases of women may come out. You may not find women inherently as funny. You may be less open to women being loud or bossy. You may find that the minute you see women, you evaluate their appearances, but you do not put that on men. Having women be mindful of all the ways in which their internalized misogyny is being exposed. And then, topics that are just women topics for some reason become supposed to be this like corner of the world where it's okay that guys don't care about it. But then things that are for men, we're supposed to all care about. Like pointing out all these things is probably super important. But perhaps now that it's like we are probably ready now for a conversation more where we just teach those examples, those things I just said, instead of just trying to skip right on to neatly packaging it. Because I think then maybe if you dissect the real things that it's inspired the girls girl movement, if it's more just like, hey, here's a common list of things you probably do where you have internalized misogyny, and it would be better in those moments to kind of bring out a little more of your girl positivity, that probably is a better approach then, because then you are hopefully more attuned to then when the girls girl thing is being weaponized and used in a non-productive way, right? Because none of those examples that I just gave mean that you would ever then not criticize a woman that you disagree with.
Yeah.
Or not hold a woman accountable for something. So it's like, I think sometimes clean little logos can help a movement get going. But then now once there's momentum, it's like, okay, cool. Now let's go back and talk about the nuance, because oversimplifying this shit can start to cause more harm than good and just reverse any progress. And so, you're right. I think now I'm seeing what you're saying with Trump's presidency. Yeah.
Because again, I always think about how do I phrase this? Like, I think where I struggle, because it's like, yes, like inherently it kind of takes me back to the POC thing, you know, where like for me, I'm like, we would get so much further ahead if we had solidarity, right? But because white people will give little bits of proximity brownie points to people who are close to but not quite, I'm like, the solidarity erodes.
Yep.
And Black people are left holding the bag. And I feel like when we look at it within the context of being a girl's girl, white women just stay letting the rest of us down.
Yeah. Right.
And it's because they can benefit from white supremacy. They can benefit from the patriarchy, because men are like, hey, like, if you do this for me, I'll make your life super easy.
Yep.
You know? And that then makes it really challenging to then trust, because it also feels like, it makes me think about that African dude I was talking about on TikTok who was like pro MAGA, and then MAGA was like, haha, like, well, we just wanted your vote.
Yep.
And I think that that's where a lot of non-white women, BIPOC women, we don't want to be that guy.
Right.
And so it just, I'm always it's not that I don't want to be pro girls girl. And it's not that, if anything, like the principles that you talked about in terms of, women supporting women, and women like to me, it's more so about like women saying that women deserve the ability to make the same money. Like women comics deserve the ability to make the same money as someone like Dave Chappelle, or like somebody like all the other male comics. I think that they get paid way more. Or even when we think about women's soccer, like the male American soccer team has nowhere near the amount of championships as the women's soccer team. And the way that they have to fight for their life to be paid properly when they're bringing home the accolades.
Yep.
That's wild to me. And so it's like, like I'm very much pro, but I feel like we've gotten to a point in the movement where it's totally been hijacked, and and there's a question that I have that will it's my next question. So when we think about the Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni saga, one of the reasons why I know that I've been super fascinated by it is largely because of this conversation around being a girl's girl, and at least how at the onset of the legal battle. So when Blake Lively dropped the New York Times story and her lawsuit, and so before Justin came out swinging with all of this like evidence, the conversation was basically that if you did not believe Blake, that you were a pick-me, and that you weren't a girl's girl. And I know that we did an On the Couch episode at the onset of this information coming out. It's going to be published. It's happening. I'm editing. And so in that episode, it's not that we didn't believe her, but I just, from what our conversation was, you and I were both kind of like, this is awful. This is horrible if it's true, but something doesn't feel right.
It also inherently feels, the word is not, I mean, there's a better word than slimy, but I'm just going to use slimy right now. It inherently feels slimy when somebody, I don't care if it's a woman, like when even a woman is trying to channel the girl's girl sympathy card and does not acknowledge that there are also other power imbalances at play. Like there's many versions. It's kind of like the privilege thing that was so talked about a couple years ago, and it's still talked about now, but like when people kind of needed a 101 refresher on that, it was like privilege does not, just because you are heterosexual does not mean that you have privilege across the board. You have privilege in that category, because that is the majority there. But you could also there's poor versus rich, there's white versus black, there's mentally, having a mental health issue versus not, there's having a poor family versus having a rich family, there's having a supportive family versus not, there's drug use versus not. There are tons of other ways in which there is a group that is more powerful than another group. And it's just, I think we brought up in that there was just something weird about also not acknowledging that you are a rich, white, more powerful and more business influential woman, and skipping all of that and just going right to the, well, this is a girl's girl supporting girls thing, isn't it? And it's like, it is, but you're just going to jump over all the other shit? Like that's a lot of other, you are not the average girl's girl. Like you're not just like my friend Jen across the street. Like there's not, Blake Lively, you are not an everyday woman. Like I know you, like and you've not tried to be. And then, which does not mean, as we've discussed, it does not mean that powerful women don't still get subjected to bullshit, patriarchal bullshit, but it feels inherently weird. And what was the word that you used before? Manipulative? Yeah, it feels manipulative to only use that card and not acknowledge the others. And I think with us both, right, Day, it didn't sit right.
Yeah, it didn't sit right. But what's interesting is that within this context, and again, this is before Justin came out with his evidence,
right?
I feel like people would have said that our questioning of Blake in the situation was us not being girls.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I have to admit, for me, as a feminist, I'm frustrated by that idea that you always have to believe women no matter what.
Right.
And I'm curious with how you wrestle with that idea that it's believe women, or if you don't believe women, if you don't believe a woman, like not even all women, like Blake Lively, like you said, is not representative of all women. She is one woman in a particular instance.
Right.
But it's that idea that like, if you question one woman, that it means that you couldn't give a shit about all women.
Right. Yeah. And I think there were a lot of examples of people on social media who did it really delicately. And I wish I had screenshotted it, but there were women I saw in all types of comment sections that would say things like, hey, I think it's important to first preface that I am a big supporter of women. I know that the common ingrained internal reaction that a lot of us have been brought up to have is just that like women are full of shit, even if we are a woman ourselves, that they're naggy, that they're manipulative, that they're complaining, that they're out for something. I know that we get good brownie points if we quickly agree with the guys on this. I understand all the things that women face. There was a lot of great comments where they were like, hey, before I give my comment, I just want to note that I've worked in this industry for so many years, and there are so many women that are not believed and genuine things happen. There were so many great women that made comments like that where they gave a really strong disclaimer in the beginning, but they were like, but with all of that said, that does not mean that we just need to automatically believe this person. Like, it's like you can acknowledge that it's important to be very sensitive to the natural power imbalance that is women's stories in the media of sexual harassment. harassment, you can call that and acknowledge that, and then also say, but with that said, I don't need to believe this person right away, and if you should not brand me as a woman basher just because I have some questions. Yeah. And I just, as you and I have always discussed, it's the nuance always seems to get lost. A lot of times I feel like, and this has happened in politics, I think this has happened with racial things, this happens with women's issues, and I think you and I have both kind of felt why it makes us sometimes feel like we don't exactly fit in a certain social political group sometimes because we just don't know where we belong. I will, especially with the Baldoni thing and the Blake Lively thing, it was that feeling of I don't fit in either comments thread. The people that are hating on her, there's an underlying thing of sexism, but then the people that are supporting her, there's this, we're missing some crucial thinking skills.
Yeah.
And so it's where do you go when you feel that you don't like how both sides are handling it? I don't know.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, it makes me think back to our conversation about interracial friendships and how you kind of broke down the stages thing that white people have to kind of go through where like they're defensive and then they're guilty.
Yeah.
And like in a lot of ways, like I feel like this girls girl ideology has come out of an overcorrection of women just not being believed for so long.
Right.
And so it's one of those things where I think now we have to ask ourselves as a society, like, it's not that we never believe them. It's not that we always believe that women are catty and full of shit and manipulative and whatever. But it also doesn't mean that we blindly believe every single woman that comes forward with a story or an allegation or things like that. And how do we find that middle while still allowing people to proudly support women? Because I hate the idea that if I want to bring up a critique or a question or, you know, whatever it may be, that then I have to also field this thing where it's like, oh, you're a pick me. Oh, you don't love women. Oh, this, that, and the other.
Yep, I know. I think it makes me, I think I'm a big fan of the try to call out and bring to the surface all of the social, political, cultural dynamics that are at play. I just think that disclaimers and acknowledging things are so underrated in my opinion. You know, I think we would all do better if at the beginning of these conversations, when anybody weighs in on it, if there are just these moments of being like, okay, I first want to acknowledge that I know that there's an intrinsic bias to, or an inherent sexism kind of rooted in a lot of us from a young age, to just automatically find any woman talking about this shrill and annoying and attention seeking and slutty. And there's already this understanding somewhere in the back of my head that if I'm against this woman, I'll kind of get more points from dudes and guys and I'll be the cool girl. But at the same time, I also don't want to overcorrect and be so on this girl's side that I'm not diligent into asking questions. And I think we would all do better at acknowledging that whatever, because the minute we comment on anything, any of us, or anything that we try to comment on, we're all dealing with pulls and reactions from the things that we feel. You know, anytime you ever comment on something, it's a lot of, in your mind, what you say is the byproduct of, well, I'm trying to be considerate of this, I'm trying to correct for this, I'm trying to take into, and it's just, I think all of us just being more open about the complexities of these topics.
Yeah.
And because we're not past them, we're not beyond them. They're still so strongly in how we react to everything. So, you know, even just acknowledging when any group of women are talking about this, like kind of what we're doing right now, right? It's a good thing to be like, do I really believe her? Or am I worried that if I comment against her that I'm going to sound anti-woman? You know, just even bringing that up. It's like, it's okay to admit and articulate out loud that we're struggling with these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not so clean cut. Like, I mean, I remember when I showed you the video that Justin Baldoni's side released of the comment that Blake had made that he ran his lips across her and said that it smelled so good and like all that stuff. And I remember there was an amazing TikToker who was a Broadway actress, had a lot of experience with intimate scenes. And she was just like, look, have I had moments where people did things that we hadn't coordinated and all of those things? Like, yes. Would I necessarily say that I would call that harassment? No. Right. And she was just like, when she watched that video, she's like, there is a difference between someone being uncomfortable with the material and the scope of what they're being asked to perform within their skill set, and then someone actively actively, like, just because you are uncomfortable does not necessarily mean you are being harassed.
Right.
And I loved the nuance in that take. Because it's so true. Because when I watched the video, I mean, it just reminded me so much of intimate moments that I would do on camera in BuzzFeed videos sometimes. And it just, but again, I also, like, it was interesting that, so when I first saw that video, it was in the context of The Hollywood Reporter had an intimacy coordinator comment on what they thought was going on in the video and like what it proves and whatever.
Right.
And the intimacy coordinator was like, well, you can tell that in moments like she's uncomfortable. And in some ways was kind of leaning towards it's somewhat damning for him. But it's just, I love that woman added in that context of just because you are uncomfortable, it doesn't necessarily mean harassment. But there are times where like it is, and like every situation.
And harassment can be very subtle. Like it can be, it's really tricky. I've worked with guys where they have been able to say something and they could say it in front of everybody. And in the way that they did it, it could be said in front of everybody and not really catch anyone's ear as inappropriate. But I know that he knew he was making me uncomfortable. And there's a weird sexual harassment and like mind ninjaing somebody. And that's why there are psychological thrillers, because the idea that you can fuck with somebody to such an intense degree and be so good at it that people around don't even realize it is just this really fascinating and scary thing about the human condition. And so it's not to say that there's maybe some context that we're missing, but just even the ability, like you said, that we had to feel slightly uncomfortable or even risking something by just saying, hey, we should dissect this video. This video should not be an automatic Blake is the victim, right? Like, I think what you're speaking to is that what good is this whole girls girl movement if the only thing it then does is just continue to silence women?
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah,
it was interesting. And it's also interesting to me that, like, as a society, we get you see this with the past election. You can now see this in the Justin Baldoni and Blake thing. Like, we are very big on making things about you're taking a side.
Yes.
And I really hate that because, like, for me, when I looked at the Justin Baldoni and the Blake thing, I'm like, I'm not team Blake, but I'm not team Justin either. Like, I am team women being able to come forward and talk about if they've been assaulted or harassed.
Yep.
And I care about this more from the point of what is this going to mean for women going forward?
Right.
That, like, I'm team survivor,
Yep.
If I'm going to have to pick a team. But I hate how we have gotten to this place in society where everything is about, well, what team are you on?
Yeah, and I think, and we're doing this thing, and I'm actively trying to work against it. Where I remember even with like the LA fires, right? My brain quickly was like, okay, Democrats say that it wasn't local officials' fault, and Republicans said that it was. And before I even knew any details on it, my brain already had learned that. Like my brain picked up. I think part of it is that we must be. I don't have any scientific evidence for this, but it would be easy to understand. I think we are better at we evaluate quicker and with more ease sides and like levels of loyalty and where like where's your group. Our brain seems to process that quicker than it does asking questions and just getting information. So it's funny, for example, that when the LA fires things happened, like the first and the easiest thing my brain was able to pick up on was politically there are these two different takes, and these are the coded political parties that are on these two sides. And that I remember thinking that it's actually unhelpful that my brain knew that first, because then trying to just figure out the information myself and ask these questions myself, there was already an inherent bias of a feeling of what team I was supposed to be on.
Yeah.
And we just don't, that does a discredit to the intelligence and the capabilities of what humans can have, I am more complex than that. Like I should be able to let me just ask my questions and just get my answers. But we sift through everything now with this lens of, well, inevitably and soon I'm going to have to pick a side.
Yeah. And it's like, even when I think about Trump winning the election, right? I don't think it would bother me that much if I felt like people voted for him for a reason person rather than picking a side.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yep.
if I felt like you knew that this guy was going to serve you in this way, and he has spoken in this way to protect whatever thing that you're interested in, or, you know, like if people, I feel like if people had real hardcore reasons as to why they were voting for him, then I'd be like, you know what? I see it, I hear it, I feel it, you know, because we're people, we all have our own interests, whatever. But it's the fact that, like, I just feel like so many people did it because they're like, fuck the libs, fuck the Democrats. I can't wait to drink your tears.
Yep. I know. And I'm trying so hard, especially with, you know, the guy that I think we've talked about this in another episode, but like the person I'm dating doesn't have the same political alignment that I do, even though what's interesting is that on particular topics, we find ourselves agreeing. But then it like then turns to then he thinks the person to vote for is different than me. And it's just, that's a whole different thing. But in that, I will find that he will say he will have takes on musicians, on you just realize now how coded everything is, right? If you liked it was so funny. Like I was like shocked that he liked the Kendrick Lamar halftime show. Because in my head, I was like, well, Republicans don't like it and Democrats seem to like it. And it was like, or I think I was surprised that he wanted the Eagles, because I was like, it seems like a lot of Republicans like the Chiefs and they don't like the Eagles. Like, and it's, if you like a quick little Google search, I can actually back up why I'm thinking those things. You know what I mean? Like there is coding in a lot of those discussions, but I have to remind myself, like, stop feeding into that. Like, stop allowing every single thing to be dominated by there is a side, because it will just get in the way of your true human potential of just asking questions and treating each situation like it is its own situation.
Yeah.
Like they are just their own things. But we are people, we like to simplify stuff. And that is why I think the power of little quirky phrases can cause such, impactful movements in good directions, and also can be so impeding and detrimental, as in the girls girl thing. Like prior to this conversation, I don't think I had actually been cognizant really of, I knew that women weaponize just the idea of feminism. I knew that was weaponized by white women often at the cost of Black women. And I knew, and I was very aware that this girls girl thing can kind of silence some people. But I don't know. I wasn't, even up until right now, I don't think I really thought about truly how, once again, this is another example of something that was meant for something good. And then it just becomes this overreaction. And now here we're holding people back. Like, it's just, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, even for me in like coming up with this episode, like even I was just like, oh my gosh, like, because I have my feelings and I'm like, are people gonna come at me and be like, you're not a girl?
No, I think it's super important. I think it's super important because the other thing too, I don't even know if you meant to bring it up, but just that you're making my brain think about is how often do we hear it? I think it's so much more common for the girls girl argument. We hear that as a collective public more when it's to say, don't come after this white woman. Like I can't think of a comment section or a TikToker or somebody. I don't have a strong reference to pull for when there's criticism of a Black woman. Do we hear the whole, well, are you supposed to be a girl's girl?
Yeah. Even like today with Karen Bass, and her and the fire chief. And there was a lot of like I remember when, so Karen Bass today fired the fire chief, who was also a woman, and she's the first LGBTQ open woman fire chief.
And she was the fire chief who was critical of Karen, correct?
Yes, and she was at the outset of the fire. She was very critical of Karen and her budget cuts and things like that. And it's so funny because there is a world where I could say that like, oh, that's not being a girl's girl, But like so many and women too were like, yeah, fuck Karen Bass. And even today, hearing that Karen Bass let go of Chief Crawley, so many people are still like, fuck Karen Bass.
Right.
And so I find it so interesting that, now hearing you say that, I'm like, if a Black woman is in trouble or is under threat or criticism, the idea is never, if anything, that's when we're like, well, they're people too, like everyone gets to get criticism.
I think there's been a big thing about with Karen Bass, just because she's a Black female doesn't mean she shouldn't avoid criticism. It's like, what are you talking about? She's nothing but criticism. I haven't heard one person. Wait,
yeah.
You're acting like there's an imaginary shield that's protecting her because she's a Black woman. It's like, I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one outlet go easy on her. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so now it's interesting because now people are even saying that they're like, oh, she basically threw Chief Crowley under the bus. And I'm just like, but where was all of this energy when she immediately criticized Mayor Bass?
Yep.
You know what I'm saying?
And also, as a quick aside, the Karen Bass and firefighter lady, there are some similarities in their beef that there are to Baldoni and Blake, which is that sometimes it's also okay to be like, you know what? These people representatively and aesthetically look like they represent people in my life, but they're not us. And I'm not, they don't represent us. I think one of the best things with the Blake Lively and Baldoni thing was people that were like, you can have your sides. There's an important cultural conversation to be had on gender and sexual harassment and blah, 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 blah. But there's also a component that we cannot ignore, which is that these are two very rich people who live in a completely different world than we do. And they also are they are not us. And same with Karen and the firefighter. There's also this just as much as we want to identify and stick up and put ourselves in these people, and there's empathy and culture discussions. This is also just the classic game of politicians after a natural disaster throwing each other under the bus. Yeah. And sometimes you're just like, they're going to all do that, and they're politicians. They're not. And I think it's good to not always do that. You don't want to just completely always not want to relate with people. But I do think it's a helpful thing to also be like, but there's also this.
Yeah. I love that you bring that up because at the end of the day, sometimes actors are just fighting actors and politicians are just fighting politicians. But I do think it's interesting when you're looking outside and at the cultural reaction where certain phrases and things are thrown into the mix. Again, it wasn't my initial reaction to say that Kristen Crowley was not being a girl's girl. It wasn't, and I immediately saw that these are two figureheads who represent two different entities that don't want to get blamed for this big thing, right? But it's also the fact that people are immediately after her firing Crowley, is that they're just oh, you're throwing her under the bus. Yeah. It's but what about if you want to say that then why wasn't it oh, you're not being a girl's girl, you're not because you're both women in powerful positions, why would you criticize her? Why don't y'all talk about that shit behind closed doors? Right? It's about, again, that weaponization and where people are bringing up certain tools of solidarity.
Yep. Kind of reminds me of when it's almost in some ways, one of the, not always, but sometimes one of the biggest things you can do to help a situation is just be what if these were two white men? Because when it's two white men, it's just two people. You know what I mean? There's no coding. There's no whatever. It's just two people. And that is such a luxury that a group that is part of the majority can do. And it reminds me of back when we both worked at BuzzFeed. If you made a video, you had to worry about, do all Black people agree with the video that you just made? And I'm not exaggerating. You literally had to get it cleared from the Black people in the office. Whereas when I made a video, I didn't have to check in with the white women. I didn't have to get a gut check to make sure I'm a white woman at the company. Before I release this video on things I don't like that guys do all you women agree on the sexual positions that I don't like? No, it was my own weird preference, and it was just what I thought. But there's this, when you are part of a minority against a majority, everything you say and do becomes this symbolic thing. And to some extent, it's important to just acknowledge that. And, we are not, I don't think I want to be so clear. The answer, for example, is not to say that in a Karen Bass and firefighter department thing that you should ignore the fact that Karen Bass is a Black woman. Right. Yeah. I am not saying to be colorblind. That's not the, but it is a note that people in these situations, it's interesting that they don't ever have the benefit of, it's just two people. It's always got to be this heavy symbolic thing. And in times we need to take that in consideration. And at other times we need to just be this could also just be two government officials trying to go at each other, and we may never know the full story. Yeah. But how does it affect us, and what can we do to make sure that we, as a county, do this better next time, right? Sometimes we can just be that's their own I saw a similar comment about that with Chris Rock and Will Smith back in the day. There were all these women being like, well, I want a man that stands up for me. And, you know, I've had my own hair problems. And they were really identifying themselves, Will Smith. And then there were other people who were like, well, I've been a comedian and I feel like I can never say what I want. And this is such an example of like, we've just gone so far in policing. And there was someone who was just like, it's also $2 gazillion celebrities who had a fight. It does not mean to negate the other very powerful and interesting cultural arguments and discussions that can come from it, because there was a lot of significance about the lack of Black women seeing men stick up for them and all that stuff. But you also can just say at the end of the day, Will Smith and Chris Rock are not your boys. Like they're not my neighbors. I don't relate to them. Like we just can also acknowledge that there's this distance. Yeah. But I get it. It's tricky. I think we are wired to want to, I mean, it's not really a bad thing, is it? I think we're wired to want to connect, but
and to see ourselves in things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish that we, as a society, we knew where, because like you said, I don't think there's anything wrong with empathizing. Like that's what makes us human, right? But then there's also this question of, I think we have to come back to, how does this move us forward? How does this benefit us as a collective? When I think about Trump, like I think there are so many people that see themselves in the fact that, you know, maybe they have a limited vocabulary like Trump. Maybe they've been made fun of because of their, it's weird. I was saying this to Jess the other day. I was like, Trump is kind of the example of a poor man's ideal rich man situation. Mm-hmm. Like he's
like caricature.
Yeah, that a poor man could see themselves as.
It's like Jordan Peterson, I think, is the YouTuber Jimmy the Giant made this great reference, but he said that Jordan Peterson is an intellectual academic to those that did not go into academia and or have a lot of exposure to like intellectual pockets. And it doesn't mean you're dumb, but if you just didn't have exposure to those cultural circles, Jordan Peterson is the idea. He's always wearing like a suit jacket and he gestures a lot with his hands and he randomly throws in big words for no reason. And in your mind, you're just like, oh, well, this is a smart guy. Yeah. And I think Trump does that similarly with being wealthy. It just or a businessman, right? This is like a successful businessman.
Yeah. And so I think there are a lot of people that see themselves in him. And so then when they see what he's going through, they almost over empathize and they're just like, oh man, you know, we can't let him sorry, I can't take it seriously because I'm like, they're just like, you know, like we can't let him get got by the government. We can't let him go to jail. Like as if it's them. And I'm just like, again, love the empathy. Yeah. But like also, how does him getting back into office benefit you? And I just wish that people thought more about that piece in the, you know, like Kristen Crowley and Karen Bass, you know, they're duking it out and you can empathize with one side or the other. But like, how does this keep us from not seeing LA burn to the ground next?
Right. Like, let's focus on what this is. The bigger thing here is that we don't want our city to fucking burn down. Like, how do we, can we focus on that?
Within the empathizing, because I get it. And I think those conversations are necessary and important. Yeah. I wish that we could also find a way to get back to collective benefit. Mm-hmm. Where is that?
Yep. And I think you bringing up empathy is a really great bullet point underneath this topic, right? Because this really does tie in to the girl's girl thing, which is this idea of overcorrecting. And the girl's girl movement is this example of overcorrecting and losing nuance. And I think that is something that ties into what we were just talking about because, you know, of course, no surprise to you, like last night I couldn't sleep. I just went down a wormhole of the French Revolution. So I have a lot of
so, love it. What did you learn?
Well, basically, to me, the most interesting thing that applies to our current day is how prior to the French Revolution, for like 100 or maybe 200 years, there was this growing trend that you could see in their newspapers of this distaste for the rich class and how it feeds into this common cycle that we go in where we are either a society that is completely enraptured in the rich, like in the 1920s or the 1980s, or some argue today, where to be rich and to be successful is just the absolute coolest. And there's no one cooler than the rich people. Yeah. And then that way of thinking gets so big that then as it gets so big, it just continues to bolster the rich up. People get more and more poor. The disparity grows and grows. And then the resentment starts to grow and grow. And then that idea of them being, it's called the recipe for the underdog. And it's believed to be the backbone of the cultural stance that they say Australia more has, which that Australia from its very genesis has this kind of underdog mentality because it was bred from these people that had been kind of ruined by the upper class. You know, rich British elites would send the poor Brits to Australia to work and whatever. Anyways, the inmates, right? So there's this interesting thing of it just going so big to one way. We love the rich. We love the rich. We love the rich. It's the coolest in the world. So then it's massive hatred, right? And neither is effective, but it is just fascinating how France itself, you know, right before the French Revolution, 100, 200 years before that, it was this blooming of just obsessing about the rich, then it's this hatred of them. So much so that you're executing rich women just because they have nice dresses. Like you're just, you know, like you get to this way that it's an absolutely impossible to feel empathy for someone just because they have money and neither is helpful, right? And I think about, it's funny to me how there have been two reactions. So my uncle is an actor and his house burned down. And I think there's been two very interesting reactions, but it's been funny how often the middle reaction I don't get. I have told family friends who immediately make a joke about it because he's rich, so he'll be fine. And there's a total lack of empathy for the fact that like he is rich, but it doesn't make him an awful person. And he lost his home. But then there's another
memories and mementos.
And his memories, right.
Yeah.
And then there's another reaction that I get from family friends, which is, and this is so sweet, but you realize you're empathizing too much. I've had family friends be like, if he needs a place to stay, if he needs, you know, like really, like, and it's like, you want to be like, you do realize that he's going to be good. Like he's got the money. Please donate your money to something else. But I think that version, it makes people feel good to be able to connect and level with rich people. Like I think there's an act of, I don't have any self-hatred towards them. I don't have any animosity. We're eye to eye in some way. And you don't want to diminish that, because you have just as much self-worth as someone who's rich. Like, I don't think you should think of yourself as a lower being. Yeah. And I'm appreciative that you're not saying, ha, 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 screw them, they're rich. But the overcorrection to then not acknowledging any economic disparity is kind of silly as well. Like, they're also not you, and you've lost a bit. Like, is why it shouldn't be weird for me to be like, they don't need that. They're super rich. They live in a completely different world than us. They're going to be fine. Like, to me, there was something in his house burning and the family friends' reactions where I was like, wow, this just shows how polarized we are in everything. I get either, ha, 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 he'll be fucking fine. Maybe he shouldn't live in the hills. And then another being like, maybe he wants to listen to this podcast I listen to or something. And it's just this, and it's, you know, it's like, it's kind of like the Luigi thing. Luigi? Is that correct?
Yes, Luigi.
Like, you don't want to live in a world where we just shoot wealthy people down and that starts to spiral and we just lose all sense of that these people are human. Yeah. But we also don't want to live in a world where people who are barely making ends meet feel like they have camaraderie with Trump.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, and so, yes, I think that with the girls girl thing, I think just hits so much on the bigger conversation about our society's inability to have nuance and find something in the middle. Like, it's just, and then it's always somehow white women are always making shit complicated, but that's the other.
But yeah, I mean, I think, and so maybe this will tie into my next question, which is, how do you think we genuinely approach building more solidarity amongst women, especially in an intersectional way? Because I think that, to me, in order for us to be more intersectional, it's going to have to, and to get to that nuanced place, it's going to have to take facing that misogyny, facing that racism, facing your propensity for white supremacy. Like, I feel like part of the reason why we struggle with it is because so many people don't want to face those very challenging things that are in us.
Yep. I don't know. I don't know do you have any inkling of what you think it will be?
I mean, this is where like I love TikTok, and I guess to some degree you could say I love social media because, you know, like last night, like I was just watching a video of a trans Black woman talking about their experience with their transness and like what it means in the face of this administration and things like that. And so just getting to hear someone's perspective outside of my own. And then you had Hunter Schafer today talking about how Trump changed the sex on her passport to male and how this is going to basically compromise their ability to survive, which was so funny to see that, like, I was watching that video last night and then Hunter Schafer came on this morning. And so one of the reasons why I will love social media is because of just getting to hear these very intimate experiences outside of myself and like what policy and these things happening mean for real lives and real people. But I also think that I am somebody that like works really hard, because it's not like I've said transphobic things before, and like not out of a desire to be transphobic, but just because I'm ignorant.
Right.
And so what I love is the ability to like learn and like not be ignorant anymore.
Right.
But I think that there are so many people that feel a sense of like, if they acknowledge that they're ignorant, then it means that they're acknowledging that they're a bad person. And I think that I would love to figure out how we break out of that mold, because if we can break out of that, then I do actually think that, I mean, I'd like to hope that solidarity is possible. But I feel like this year, I mean, I just feel like I'm constantly being confronted with this idea that I'm like, oh God, I don't know if solidarity will be real.
Yeah. Well, because to your point, Day, it's like the stepping stones to solidarity are listening and asking questions and not jumping to conclusions and nuance. And I think that it is just, as much as we like social media, we also have this algorithm that really pushes to the top hot takes. And you can see it when there's longer videos too. Like I've noticed this when I look at political commentary videos on YouTube, you can see at the bottom where the uptick is in the viewing. People will scrub to the very end to be like, what? Like this person's trying to give context, but just where do you stand on it? Right? Like everyone just wants the take. Everyone just wants the hot take. And are we wired like that? Is that just the trend that where we are now? Does social media's algorithms exacerbate something that is already kind of we're predisposed to? I don't really have the answer for why that is, but to your point, you're so right. It would be great, for example, if someone was like, hey, I said this thing and I'm ignorant and I want to be educated. But people are not that. The next like 4 or 5 tweets or the next 4 or 5 minutes of that video of someone just kind of working it out will never surface as quickly as the person who's either just like, I'm so fucking sorry and I'm the worst, or go fuck you all, I'm not sorry. You know, like that's just not, I don't know how we make meandering, thoughtful, inquisitive, nuanced conversation more interesting than just hot takes. It's really tricky. And
So here's the thing, because I'm thinking about how, you know, Trump's playbook has just been to overwhelm people.
Yeah.
And so you could say that from doing that, I mean, people will get exhausted and they'll actually maybe have more of a propensity to go towards like, okay, like you're doing too much. Is there somebody that like is actually going to like process with me? So that's one thing.
I think that's a good point, Day. And I also think if people do that, right? Like if they get tired, like you said, I hope then the other thing they kind of get tired of is this like false idea that at any fucking like I think such a weird thing is, and I hope you get this and this is not too out there. Social media makes us think that there is a story, one story that just fucking lives everywhere, right? I try to think about this because Daysha knows I like to do deep dives into what the other side thinks. So I will spend like an hour on Sunday just subjecting myself to Fox News and really conservative.
Bless your heart.
Because I'm like fascinated, right? Like I look at it as like it's like free access to the enemy, and not trying to be too silly there, because I know that you listen to Fox News, you're not inherently my enemy, but in just a shorthand.
No, totally.
And what I find so interesting is that it helps me understand the mindset behind somebody who, if they heard that Trump changed the gender on that person, right? In their mind, there is a current onslaught of overly liberal, pushy, radical people who don't want to listen to reason and want to let anybody just say that they're anything, and there will be no there's no guardrails for anything, and it will move society in a scary and unhinged way, and it has become politically unacceptable to want to push back at all. And Trump is the only brave one willing to break through and slow it down. And I guarantee you, people who would support hearing that Trump did that might not even have that much hatred towards a trans person, and they might not even have that much disdain towards someone they know changing their gender. But those isolated incidences they don't think are the story. They think the story is this big, scary push, and what they end up agreeing on is just that he's pushing back against this thing. And half the time I just want to be like, if I were to meet somebody at work, it wouldn't be at this work, but if I were to meet somebody at work and they heard about what Trump just did and they were supportive of it, I would want to remind them that, like, in this cafe right now, or this office right now, no one is fucking going after, no one is trying to bust into your bathroom with a different gender. No one is trying to, like, take your kid. And, like, that is a story that exists out there, but sit with me and just look around and, like, let's just be here with me right now. Like, what is the story right now that you know that we are here for? Like, just sit with me for a fucking sec. And I think, I don't know, we've lost that. There's just this, we love stories. We are people who follow narratives, and they have successfully made this narrative that just follows us all the time. But I also know that Democrats do that too, right? So my narrative that I'm trying to fight against is that any person who's ever voted Republican in these past elections just hates Black people, doesn't like women, doesn't care about your safety, because I can easily be very triggered because I walk around with that narrative too. Now, this might be biased, but I think my narrative is a bit more accurate. And
I know.
Just to be transparent, right? Like, I'm not both sidesing it, because I do think there is a more accurate side. But I do walk around, because, like, to be fair, when the guy I was dating was like, I have genuine concern against what Karen Bass did, I lost it, because I wasn't just mad at him criticizing Karen Bass. I don't know anything about Karen Bass, but he was now just a head, like a talking head for the enemy.
Yeah.
And I just lost it. And I think that type of short circuit to just anger and siding it is what people do when they hear some of the people, not all, some of the people that support what Trump just did are just horrible assholes, right? But some people, they've short circuited to this thing that I'm scared of, that I don't like, that represents bad. He's pushing against it. I hear a thing that he does that pushes against the thing that I don't like or that scares me. He's working for me. He's the good guy. Here we go. And but you're right. I think, to your point, I can only hope that people tire of that mental exercise, because it is exhausting. As much as it's exciting and easily clickable, constant outrage is exhausting.
Yeah. And it's so funny. So I was talking to one of my friends earlier. She had listened to our podcast episode on interracial friendship. And so I was talking to her a little bit more about how, like, the beef between Africans and African Americans. And I was telling her how, like, I got into a lift I was in a lift, and my Lyft driver was African. And even though, like, I am African, I am very much African American. Like, I am very much both, because yes, my dad is Nigerian, but, like, I grew up here. I lived here. Like, for all intents and purposes, to me, like, I am a Black American woman.
Yep.
And so, he was just doing the thing where he was shitting on African Americans about how, like, they're lazy and, they need to get off their asses and go to college and do all these things. And he's saying a lot of, like, really inflammatory shit. Yep. But I, ever since college, have tried to work towards this mindset of just, like, actually, like, just letting them, like, hearing them out. Yep. And then and like, it was so funny to see this, because he's saying all this stuff, and I'm just like, oh, yeah, okay. I don't really agree, but okay. And this man, we were in front of the house that I was going to, and he would not let me out this car, because he's like, wait, but, and I'm like, yeah, no, cool, I hear that. I don't really agree with it.
Isn't it funny how people can't? But I was gonna just say, isn't it funny how people can't handle that? But I'm one of those people, so I need to not, like. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like shitting on this guy for being like, wait, what? You don't agree? But I'm the same way. Like, I have a very difficult time with people that don't agree with me, but I'm working on it. Yeah.
But, see, and again, it also comes back to, like, self-awareness, right? Because a lot of times I try to remember that these people just want to be heard. So I'll give them the space to talk, but I'm like, just because I'm hearing you out, I'm like, I'm not going to agree with you. And they will I almost feel like that gets them angrier than me.
But you're so
going
smart,
at it.
Day. What you just said is so right. If we talk about these movements in society where we try to do one thing and then we overcorrect and then it creates all this hostility and then we try to bridge it, but then there's just more hostility. You're so right that one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that people just want to be heard. Because I can even attest to the fact that, like, I think I've gotten more. In a conversation, I will start saying things where I am turning into a more exaggerated version of myself in whatever I believe, simply if I don't feel like the person is hearing me out. Like it revs me up. You know what I mean? Like if I think you're like I was talking to a friend from back home and he was like, I don't know, I'm not the biggest Kamala fan. And I'm not like some diehard Kamala. Like I voted for her, but I'm not like Kamala or not. Like I was never but I just kept trying to make like 1 or 2 points about her policies that were better or that I didn't feel like he was really listening to. And he was just so dismissive that by the end of this like 15-minute call, I was like, I'm literally Googling like top accomplishments of Kamala, like while I'm on the phone with him, trying to like, well, did you know that she did this? Like I ended the conversation being so obsessed with Kamala and just heightening my stance because I didn't feel like I was being heard. Like it just, you're so right, Day. It's people with any of these conversations and disagreements. That is really funny how feeling like you were not being heard, how much that catapults you just even further.
Yeah. So I always, when I did my thesis, which was around like the Black identity and basically my experience in life, which has been like I've been in Black spaces doing the same shit and I'm white, and then I'm in white spaces doing the same shit and I'm Black. And there was a French psychoanalyst that I studied, Frantz Fanon. He had this amazing quote. I think I had mentioned this in an episode and I said I was going to find it. I have no idea where my thesis is because obviously trying to write all of that shit and produce that shit was awful. But he has this quote where he's like, I prefer not to burn man like a farmer with a cattle prod. Like I prefer to like warm their body and leave them. And I was like, and it's always stayed in my mind. And so it's always kind of the approach I try to take. Again, try being the key word.
Try, yep.
Because I do think it's really effective. Like just giving people the space to like say what they need to say, and I'm just kind of like, oh, that's interesting. This is what I think. And okay, cool, bye. You know?
And I wonder too because it's funny, even the way you had asked this initial question in this episode made me answer in such a more honest way because you just asked it where you were just like, what is your feeling on this cultural phrase, right? Whereas I'm trying to think if you had said something like, I think this cultural phrase is the best in the world, or I think it's the worst, it probably would have I don't think I would have answered as honestly because I think my brain would have automatically either tried to match you or start trying to be like the devil's advocate and like try to be like, okay, well, wait, like dig my heels more in the sand in another way. Like you really do get people's more honest reactions when you're first just like, okay, first and initial goal is just, what are your thoughts? Like, I'm here to listen. God, that's so fucking hard though. Cause I always
I mean, I'm not trying to say it's easy, but like, I do think that, I even think about that Lyft driver who was listening to Joe Rogan. And obviously I'm not a Joe Rogan fan, but I was like, this dude is, and I don't really understand why. So why don't I ask? And like, not from like a judgy place, which again, I know can be really hard, but just kind of like, how does this guy speak to you? Like, what does this mean for you?
Yep. It's so like, I'm going to end this podcast. I'm driving home and for the next like 30 minutes, I'm going to be like, wow, I really feel like I'm going to be able to be so much more chill in confrontation right now. And I know that will last an hour.
Well, because you're an Aries. You were
But I really am trying. I'm trying.
You were born to fight. So
yeah, and I'm actively, it's really something that I'm trying. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Well, as you know, we close out every episode playing a game called Scroll Double Tap DM. And then if you have not been here before with Becky, even though we all love her and we're obsessed with her and we want to connect with her, the only way that you can do that right now is by putting a note on a pigeon.
Or Patreon, being in the group.
Oh, yes. Or being in the Patreon group or in the Facebook group that we have as well. I love that. I love that you brought that up.
I'm not lying, Day. That is probably the best way to connect with me.
So yes. So for our Scroll Double Tap DM, I decided, I looked up, I And I found a BuzzFeed article, which was really funny because the BuzzFeed article is basically a quiz about like, here are 27 celebrities. Do you think they're a girl's girl? And so I chose
that is so interesting.
Yeah, because there's also there's a poll. So I took the top 3 celebrities that were on the list for our choices. So it was Taylor Swift, Zendaya, and Ariana Grande. So
Taylor Swift, Zendaya, Ariana Grande, and who else?
Well, so the list is, there's 27, but I'm only taking the top 3.
Okay, so those are the 3 that you just said.
Yeah, so Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, Zendaya. So out of that group, who are you scrolling, double tapping, or DMing based on them being a girl's girl?
That's so interesting that those are the 3, because I honestly think that all 3, if you had asked this like maybe 5 years ago, I would have been like, not Taylor Swift and not Ariana Grande. But in recent years, I think I saw an interview with Taylor Swift where she was talking about how she took to heart the criticism that she was making these, like she was weaponizing like girl groups. And just kind of how that was not her initial, like that's not, you know, she was trying to correct for that. And then there was a thing with Ariana Grande, maybe a little recently, where she was, you know, she had done a lot of duet collab work as a younger person, easily more threatened, and how that's why it was so important for her when she did Wicked to come in and be like, we are going to only support each other. Like whomever my other co-star is, it's going to be just like 2 women really supporting each other. And then I feel like Zendaya's always had that mentality. So I actually none of them are currently any of them speak to me as being not supportive of women, if that is the definition that we're using of girl's girl right now. But in your game, no one's actually dying. It's just who you're going to pass on, right?
No, yeah, it's who you're going to pass on, who you're going to give a little like to, and then who you would hop in their DMs being like, that's my girl's girl.
Okay, so I think Zendaya would be DM.
Obviously.
Because I think I have a crush on her a little. I think I'm pretty...
Who isn't? Who doesn't? Yeah. I don't even care if you're straight. Zendaya is perfect. I'm
pretty obsessed with her. So I think Zendaya would be DM, and then I think I would double tap Ariana, and then I would scroll past Taylor, but not with any hatred, just to scroll.
Becky, we're like twins, but I have feelings.
I know. Yeah.
I feel like every time we've done this, we have always had the same outcome. It is insane.
That is so funny. So funny. So, I mean, it's a pretty obvious one, right? Like, Zendaya's going in your DMs. Like, there's nothing.
Oh, obviously. Like, there was just no negotiation about that.
Yeah.
Of course.
No.
And then it's so funny because, so in the BuzzFeed quiz, they said, so 80% of votes said that she's totally a girl's girl. And so that was 18,000 people. And then 7% said she's not. And that was 1,600 people. And then 13% said that they're unsure. And that was 3,000 people.
Huh.
So for me, with Ariana Grande, it's interesting. I don't know. Because let me tell you, if Ariana wants your man, Ariana's getting your man.
Oh, yeah. Well, wait, are there other examples of her doing that?
Oh, yeah. Like, so when she and the Ethan Slater guy got together, I then went down, like, a wormhole of, like, just her dating history. And, like, pretty much, like, most of the guys that she's been with, their start has always come from a very shady, like, he was involved with somebody else. And then Ari was hanging around a little too much. And then all of a sudden they started dating. Also, she has a song that's like, break up with your girlfriend, I'm bored. Like, homegirl is so clear. Like, she is, like, she's a Cancer. And here's the thing. So it's like, there's a part of me that's like, I don't fuck with that. I don't think I'd let her be around my man. But at the same time, like, at least she's straightforward. At least she's like, I get what I get.
She's letting you know that that's what she would do.
Like, literally, and it's so hard to not look at her song titles and not see how shady but like open she is about it. She has a song called The Boy Is Mine, and then like, yes, I took your man, and so I'm like, damn. So I don't know if I call her a girl's girl, but at least she's straight. At least, you know, she's not lying in your face. Because I think the reason why I would scroll on Taylor Swift, and I will say, like, maybe I just don't know enough. I'm real hard on her, but I also feel like I should be, you know? And I think that at least...
Does she remind you of somebody?
Taylor Swift, it's not that honestly, she reminds me of the girl that I wrote in my play, where it's like the liberal daughter and the Republican father.
Mm-hmm.
I think part of that is just because I just feel like she is so silent when things matter, except for when it's about her. So I think about when Nicki Minaj was calling out, I think, the MTV Video Music Awards for whatever reason. And Taylor like took that moment where Nicki was trying to make it about like Black women and their artistry being respected at award shows and made it about her. And like, it was just like so really frustrating because it was just like, you know, like this, like what Nicki is saying, like, yes, you are involved. Like, yes, you are one of the nominees, but this is about so much more than her saying that, you know, why are you getting this or whatever. And there's just a number of times where I feel like Taylor has done that. Like, I feel like for me personally, with the whole Kayla, Nicole, and Travis situation, like, I was like, Taylor, you were Times One of the Year. You're a billionaire. You sold out 1 million shows. Can you not tell your fans to be racist or to stop being racist?
Yeah.
Like, this woman, like, you won, you have him, right? And so to me, it's just like, and your fans are spewing racist vitriol at this woman. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I would understand feeling a little insecure about her because Kayla's a smoke show, okay? Like, I get that. But I'm also like, there are just so many other ways in which you have power in this situation. And the fact that, like, you won't tell your fans to leave this woman alone and to stop being racist at her, that was really hard for me.
Yeah.
So...
Yep. I think that's all very fair.
I love that you mentioned that you saw that interview of her, like, really taking to heart what people were saying when she was doing the whole, oh my gosh, the squad?
Oh, God, yeah. Because that's actually the height of when I hated her. Because I was like, you are weaponizing. This was supposed to be this camaraderie of women. And instead, you've turned it into, like, the mean girl group that so many of us have horrible memories of. It's not empowering. It's mean. And it was giving off an intentionally, I know she could deny this, but I don't think she denied it. But it was intentionally giving off the you can't sit with us.
Yeah.
Type of energy. And that was just, you're an adult, you're a grown woman. There are so many girls already dealing with that. You don't need to make that type of action cool. Like, we don't need you helping that movement of the you can't sit with us pretty girl vibe. Like, it just wasn't, Yeah.
I think it's one of those things for me. I'm like, I don't hate Taylor Swift by any means, but like, I am critical of her and I think that she could do more. So that's why I scroll past her.
No notes. No notes.
So, the road to female solidarity in 2025 will not be an easy one, but I do think it's one that we should continue to traverse and to grapple with the rocks and the bumps that come along. The Me Too movement definitely unearthed a lot of systemic bullshit that had been going on for decades, if not centuries. And just like with any movement, it had its strength and it had its growth areas. And I think the universe is asking us to tap into those growth areas this season and to continue to push for depth and understanding in what it means to be a girl's girl. And I hope you'll take some time during Women's History Month to really contemplate that. All right, if you loved this episode as much as I did, or had questions or things you wanted to add to our conversation, make sure you leave us a comment wherever you are listening. You can also screenshot the episode and tag me on social media with your thoughts, or you can join the Real Talk Friend Therapy Facebook group and Patreon to engage with us there. Again, this is basically where you can reach Becky if you want to connect with her. So if you love our dynamic, you can come on over and hang out with us there. I also hope that you'll tune in next week for a continuation on this theme, where I'll be talking to a sexuality journalist on how we can best support our friends after sexual assault. Trust that you do not want to miss it. All right, besties, I'll catch you later. Your girl is out. Loving Real Talk Friend Therapy? Of course you are. So don't forget to show us some love with a 5-star review wherever you are listening, and to join our Patreon to unlock bonus recordings, videos, private chats, and more.